I love deck building. As of recording, I have 9 commanders I've built on rotation, multiple concepts and works in progress, and plenty of decks that I've built and taken apart after finding them dropping a bit too much in my priority list. I also built a gift deck for Sam, Manager at Loading Bar, Perpetual Izzet Mage, and Tortured Observer at one too many Commander Nights. Not to brag, maybe bragging a little, but I get a lot of compliments on the decks I build, often because I've just done something incredibly silly, the latest example of which is pictured here, where I was taking 8 upkeeps per turn with 10 plus upkeep triggers out. More on that one in a later video. Today I want to talk to you about my methods of building decks from beginning to ill-defined end, using my list for Narset, Enlightened Exile as an example. Let's start where I'm pretty sure 99% of commander decks start. Choosing a commander. Your choice of commander could be for any number of different reasons. Maybe you just pulled a new legendary and instantly fell in love with them. Maybe they've been sat in your collection for a while waiting for you to do something with them. What draws you to a commander? Is it mechanically really interesting to you? Does it work really well with another card you have sat in your binder? Do you just like the options presented in its colour combination?
Let's have a look at my choice. Narset Enlightened Exile is a 3/4 for Jeskai and 1 generic, printed in March of the Machine, The Aftermath. We're not going to get into that one. She gives all creatures you control, including herself, prowess, which gives +1/+1 until end of turn whenever you cast a non-creature spell. And when she attacks, you exile a non-creature, non-land card from any graveyard and copy it, which you may cast without paying its mana cost. Bonus here, this free cast will give you another prowess trigger before damage is dealt.
I knew I wanted to build her for a while, but didn't go for it until fairly recently, after finishing off a couple of other lists. I really liked the idea of building Jeskai, having enjoyed the playstyle of the Planeswalker party pre-con, and that she offered freedom in exactly how she could be built. Do you go for a creature strategy, taking advantage of prowess on other creatures? Do you build her Tron style with auras and equipment? Storm? Either way, I have my starting point.
From here I like to think about the rares and mythics separate from my bulk that synergize well with what I initially think the deck wants to do. For Narset I picked out Gamble from Dominaria Remastered, a cheap prowess trigger, and due to Narset's pseudo-recursion, a less risky offering than normal. Commandeer, reprinted in Commander Masters, a free cast and powerful counter that can be absolutely back-breaking for your opponents. And March the Machine's Chrome Host Seed Shark, another prowess-like trigger, to name a few. I continue this process until I think I've identified a good number of potential includes, as well as a few potential lines of play and win cons. From there it's time to tackle my bulk. I'm a big believer in making a playable version of a deck with cards I already own before seeking out cards that I don't. I like to go through my bulk, pulling out all cards that I think could work with the general idea of the deck, as well as staples like mana rocks, non-basic lands, and sources of card draw. This part can be time-consuming if you have a large collection, or may not offer many options if you're fairly new or don't own a lot of cards. But I find it helps me make something authentic to myself, and often leads to me finding a couple gems I forgot about or didn't realise I had. In this case I found Third Path Iconoclast from Brothers War, Irenicus Vile Duplication, and Lavan Cultist of Tiamat from Commander Legends Battle for Baldur's Gate. Third Path Iconoclast is a 2/1 for Izzet that gives you a 1/1 colourless artifact soldier creature token for each non-creature spell you cast. Easy value in a prowess deck. Irenicus Vile Duplication works incredibly with Narset, creating a non-legendary copy with flying for a blue and 3 generic, giving all your creatures prowess. Yeah, it stacks. And giving you a second copy cast each turn. If you can get Narset to 5 power the turn you cast it, you can even get another copy out for prowess. Lavan, Cultist of Tiamat, is a 1/3 for red and 2 generic that pumps the creature's power for the mana value of non-creature spells you cast until end of turn, allowing you to ensure that Narset's power is always high enough to recast any non-creature spell you've cast that turn. After combing through everything, I usually end up with between 100 and 200 cards, not including lands, that I can start whittling down to create an initial list. This is where I open up an online deck builder and start keeping track of what I'm adding. I personally use Archidakt, but other options, like Moxfield, are available. Using this, I can start incorporating lands and mana rocks, and identifying how many cards beyond this I can add. I start with around 36 or 37 lands, and between 8 and 10 pieces of ramp. These are often obvious classics like Sol Ring and Arcane Signet, or the talismans in my chosen colour identity, as well as colourless ramp with utility like Mind Stone and Thought Vessel, particularly if I'm not playing green. I find that adding custom tags to cards beyond their types is really helpful for keeping track of how many cards are providing certain utility in my decks, whether that's ramp, card draw, removal, or my core deck mechanic, in this case prowess and cast triggers. Having a good idea of what exactly each card is doing makes it much easier to aim for consistency in the final list, as well as when it comes to making changes in future, and where to start when considering swapping cards out. If you want some more information on how to do this with your decks, I definitely recommend checking out EDH Recast's How Simple Sorting Makes You Better at EDH, which I'll include a link to in the description of this video. Now I've got my commander, some must-includes from my binder, a bunch of basic lands and mana rocks, I can start filling out the around 40 to 50 remaining cards required to complete an initial list. This is where your personal creativity can really come out. Maybe, like me, you've identified some uncommons and commons that work really well with your commander, and you know you have to include in the final list. This is a great place to start. Tagging each of your additions as you go will help you hone in on your idea of what you need when it starts to get to the last 10 or so cards, and decision making gets really tough. You should also keep an eye on your color distribution and mana curve as you're filling out your list, as this will help you tweak your mana base accordingly, inform you if you do well to include some mana fixing like Chromatic Lantern, and otherwise keep an eye out in case you're jamming in too many expensive spells.
Once I have an initial list, either on my deck builder or in paper, I like to do a little bit of goldfishing to test how well it's working, and figure out the best lines of play. Goldfishing is the process of testing a deck by playing it by yourself, against an opponent who does nothing. An architect has a great playtester for this that lets you track your health, your opponents, counters, tokens, and just about everything else. I can also often be found on the floor of my living room testing decks on my coffee table while catching up on content on TV.
Now you've got a vague outline of what your initial deck list looks like, start using resources like Gatherer to find cards that you may not have considered, or often didn't realize existed, by searching for certain mechanics that you think might apply to your list. You can do this simply by searching the internet for MTG Prowess or MTG whenever you cast a non-creature spell, for example. This is often where I visit EDH Rec as well, looking for my commander and seeing if there's any interactions or synergies that I've missed. For some of the cards I find this way, I might realize I have them and go look for them as options for my list, but for the ones I don't, I start constructing a wish list of cards that I don't own and would like to potentially find. Commander decks are so varied and personal that I find they're never really finished, and that as I go from playing my initial brew to refining it over time, I start to hone in on my idea of what cards would really work, as well as the cards in my list that might be underperforming. For Narset, I wanted to try and find Doctor Who's Ensnared by the Mara, a sorcery for 2 red and 2 generic that offers opponents a villainous choice. Exile cards from the top of their library until they hit a non-land card, which I may then cast without paying its mana cost, or exile the top 4 cards of their library and take damage equal to their combined mana values. This is great, as depending on your opponent's choices, Ensnared by the Mara could give you 3 prowess triggers or deal massive damage depending on what they exile. Then, if Narset's power is high enough, we can do it all over again on attacks. I also ended up looking for Balmor Battlemage Captain, a 1/3 flyer for Izzet that grants creatures +1/+0 and trample until end of turn whenever you cast an instant or sorcery, which often ends up being a win condition. And Consider, an instant for blue that lets you look at the top card of your library and choose whether to put it into your graveyard and then draw a card. Once I have my initial wish list, I often drop a message on my LGS's group chat, asking if anyone has the cards I'm looking for trades, and then browse Card Market, being in the UK, to get an idea of what the singles might cost if I were to go the route of purchasing them. A commander deck is a living, breathing thing, and as you play it you'll find that you'll be constantly making changes as you open packs, make trades, or buy singles. Mana bases will develop and become more effective as you find more non-basics to slot in. I hear Ravnica Remastered is really good for that. Also, if you're feeling fancy, Doctor Who boosties have some absolute gems. Your strategy may change slightly as you find out how the deck plays over time. In Narset's case, the initial list was much more creature heavy, but became much more focused on Narset herself as I found that she was dealing 90% of the damage in games. You'll also find the need for more or less ramp and card draw as you get a larger sample size of how well these elements are propping up your deck in games. Maybe you'll even cut that soul ring after a while.
This is not the be-all and end-all of how to build decks. It's just my method that I find helps me save a little bit of money while brewing, rediscover old favourites that have been sat in my collection, and churn out new decks while keeping my rotation fresh. I'm hoping that you can find some tips in here that you can transfer to your own methods of deck building, rather than just telling you to build a specific list. While I may do some deck techs in the future, I first wanted to share my loose blueprint for building any commander at all. Some decks I build this way get taken apart. Some get gutted and refreshed from time to time, and some withstand the test of time and are seeing a lot of play at my commander nights. At the time of recording, my list for Narset comes to $132.04, going by MTG Goldfish's paper pricer. I'll include a link to the full list below, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on it, what cards you'd add or take out, and whether you decide to give it a go. Thank you as always for watching, and if you'd like to give me a +1 and like and subscribe, I will maybe get to swing for lethal next turn. Also, if you've got any burning advice to share, I'd love to hear it below. See you next time.